Night on the Bay of Biscay, winter 1943. The U-boat rode the swell like a wolf that had outgrown the forest and learned to stalk in open fields. On the bridge, the commander raised his binoculars and listened to the wind, because for years the night had belonged to him. On the surface, he was fast, almost invisible, a sleek silhouette against the black horizon. Below, he was blind and slow. The doctrine was simple and deadly. Approach at night on the surface, slip inside the convoy screen, fire, dive, escape. The Atlantic had been his hunting ground. Then the sky grew eyes. First it was a suspicion, a pattern sensed in the bones, that patrol aircraft were finding boats at night too easily. Then came the proof, a violent cone of white that burst from a blacked-out aircraft and flooded the sea with day. Leigh Light. Alarm, he snapped, and the bridge crew pitched into motion, then trained to vanish beneath the surface in seconds. But they would write later about what they felt in that instant. The sea is different now. The enemy sees and remains unseen. What German U-boat commanders said when Allied radar turned the Atlantic against them was not dramatic so much as resigned. The hard language of professionals who understood that the geometry had changed. We cannot fight what we cannot see, one wrote. Night used to be our ally, now it betrays us. To understand those words, you have to start before the light, before the radar that could see a conning tower miles away, before the magnetron shrank wavelengths and made warnings useless. You have to start with the way Dennett taught his skippers to fight a tonnage war by turning the ocean's darkness into armor. Surface at night, attack in packs, talk on high frequency to summon wolves from hundreds of miles, then vanish. For a time it worked. Convoys burned, freighters listed and sank, and the narrower gap in mid-ocean protected the killers. Allied radar began clumsy, heavy, and easily betrayed. A long wavelength pulse an operator might mistake for weather on a green oscilloscope. U-boats received Metox sets, crude ears that heard those long waves and whispered danger. Commanders felt the comfort of a ticking box and the illusion that technology was a shield. But technology was a race, and by late 1940 the British had leapt lanes. They put small, powerful magnetrons into aircraft sets, shrinking the beam to 10 centimeters, beyond Metox's hearing. Now a Wellington or a Liberator could find a boat on black water without the boat ever knowing how. Add the Leigh Light, a brutal white searchlight slave to radar for the last seconds of an approach, and the surface at night stopped being shelter. What did commanders say then? They wrote of aircraft that arrived out of emptiness, of attacks that began with a pale glow on a cloud and ended in explosions alongside. They wrote of the old trick failing, that night surface running no longer fooled the enemy. And over the wireless, they said less, because saying too much now pulled the news. Allied HFDF, huffed up to sailors, had sprouted on escorts and stations ashore, a direction-finding ear that turned a wolfpack's chatter into bearings and ambush. When a commander keyed his set to call the pack, he also called the hunters. One of them wrote, simply, "There has closed the gap." That gap had been the mid-ocean space beyond land-based aircraft, the black pit where U-boats could stalk unmolested. Now very long-range Liberators flew there, escort carriers rolled with convoys, and radar stitched the sky to the sea. A German officer described the change in his patrol log with a mathematician's clarity. Before, our risk grew with daylight and shrank with night. Now it is constant and unseen, and our best tactic invites death. He was not alone. From the Biscay lanes to the Greenland routes, captains began to shorten surface time to charge batteries under cloud to time dives with moonrise to order lookouts to scan not just the horizon but the stars for the shadow of a wing. They argued on mess decks about Metox, whether its box saved them or betrayed them, and some switched it off entirely when rumors spread that the Allies were homing on its signal. It was a lie encouraged by the enemy, and it worked. Taking away the warning left them naked to the new, silent, short wavelength sets. Another commander wrote home, "We dive earlier now, we surface later, and still they find us." He did not have to name radar to make the point. It was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost that turned equipment into instinct and instinct into fear. The British, for their part, layered advantage upon advantage. Surface ships carried Type 271 radar and lantern domes that saw periscopes and bridges in seas where a human eye would fail. Escort groups trained to stay with the fight, using Hedgehog ahead, throwing mortars that punished a diving boat before it could slip away. HFDF bearings cued search patterns, centimetric ASV painted returns, and the light blasted shadows into certainty. Each piece on its own hurt. Together they transformed a theater. By early 1943, captains coming off patrol told a different kind of story in bars at Lorient and St. Nazaire. Not the brag of tonnage sunk, but the inventory of miracles survived. A Liberator at night without stars. A destroyer that turned toward them out of fog as if drawn on a wire. A boat sunk not in attack, but while crossing the bay, hunted on the commute like a clerk walking to work. They spoke of the ocean as a net now, of strands they could not see, of rules that had reversed. We are the ones who must hide. We are not the hunters anymore. And when May came and losses spiked, their language shifted from adaptation to something harder. It had a month with a name, Black May. In May 1943, U-boat losses outpaced sinkings by a margin. Commanders could feel like a chill at their necks. They came home past empty pens and silent cranes and realized the hunters had become quarry. They looked for explanations they could use, and the list was long but converged on one truth: radar had reached them wherever they tried to hide. On patrol debriefs they stopped calling it a device and started calling it there, because that is how it felt: omnipresent, invisible, indifferent. One skipper drew a thumb across his throat and said, "Surface at night, day at dawn." Contrast was the cruel teacher. The very tactics that had kept them alive for years now drew attention like flares. Surface at night had been safety. Surface at night had become signal. Ashore, in the concrete galleries of Lorient, St. Nazaire, La Palisse, and Brest, the talk turned from courage to cost. Dennets had built a war on mathematics, on tonnage sunk per month, and boats lost per patrol. Suddenly the denominators were climbing. Commanders arrived gaunt from sleepless watches and said things their younger selves would have mocked. We cannot close with the convoys. We cannot remain on the surface. We cannot transmit. We cannot win like this. Radar was the thread running through each complaint, and it ran through new allied rhythms too. Type 271 set escorts seeing periscopes, ASV Mk III aircraft sweeping the night with centimetric beams, Leigh Light searing final seconds into memory, HFDF pinning wireless calls to bearings. Very long-range Liberators closing the last safe water. To a man in a conning tower, these were not acronyms but sensations, a faint hum of generators, and then the world exploding white, a sudden bearing change of an unseen destroyer. A roar of engines that seemed to know exactly where he floated. Some tried to answer with flak, turning their boats into floating anti-aircraft traps that dared patrol planes to come close. A few aircraft fell, many boats did not return. The Bay of Biscay, once a corridor, became a gauntlet lit by radar and finished by rockets and depth charges. Other skippers leaned on new devices rushed from shore labs, Naxos to sniff at 10-centimeter waves, tunas to hear more, bold canisters to throw a false wake of bubbles. GHG hydrophones to listen for pursuers, Zaunkönig acoustic torpedoes to turn the chase. The Allies answered with Foxer noisemakers towing racks of jangling pipes that lured the seeker heads away, and another asymmetry appeared. Every German invention seemed to force the boat. To slow, to complicate, to hide. Every Allied countermeasure seemed to invite them to press, to illuminate, to strike. Under the Channel's chop, snorkels arrived and promised salvation, the ability to run diesels while submerged, to travel unseen. In practice they were brittle, loud, tiring, and still betrayed by radar when a mast top broke the surface. Commanders logged headaches from fumes, crews fainted at stations, the boat rolled and hunted under waves that turned the snorkel into a metronome of panic. Still, they persisted, because the alternative had become arithmetic, and radar made the math cruel. Letters home shortened, bravado thinned, and the words edged toward fatalism. The tone in wardrooms shifted from tactics to odds. One captain told another, "I am learning to love fog, and I am learning to hate the moon." He was not being poetic. He was updating doctrine. BDU issued orders to avoid the convoy corps and attack stragglers, to cross Biscay submerged by day, to transmit less, to rethink the wolfpack itself. It sounded like adaptation, but the men who read those orders knew what they meant, surrendering tempo to the enemy's sensors. Radar had taken initiative from the hands of skippers and given it to anonymous operators in humming rooms, and to pilots who could turn a green smear into a kill. They felt the humiliation of being fixed by a device, of fighting men they could not see, of dying because a wavelength had shortened. And yet pride survived, and with it a professional clarity that reads, in surviving logs, like a quiet indictment of fate. "We are not beaten by courage," one wrote, "but by instruments. The ocean is smaller when their sets are on." The contrast could not be sharper. The same Atlantic that swallowed fleets now felt like a lit arena. Historians often add another thread here: code breaking, traffic analysis, intelligence, and they are right, ultra matter. But for the men on the bridges and in the control rooms, the change they felt in their skin was radar. It changed every choice, whether to sprint or drift, whether to surface to breathe or wait for battery margins to vanish, whether to call for help or carry silent. Veterans from early patrols tried to teach tricks to new captains and heard themselves offering ghosts. Keep the wind astern, use the rain, count seconds between glare and impact, turn the moment the light hits you, never assume the dark is empty. Some of these rules saved lives, none restored initiative. Boardings after sinkings recovered diaries and remarked on a shared refrain, "We did not know they were there until they were upon us." In that sentence sits the heart of the transformation, and it is why commanders, for all their professionalism, began to talk about chance as if it were an officer on the roster. Luck once meant sighting a convoy or slipping a destroyer. Now luck meant never crossing a beam. They adapted again, because that is what sailors do when the sea and the enemy both change. They learned to trim by air, to slide beneath thermoclines, to treat the snorkel like a fragile lung, to ration every emperor as if it were blood. They still whispered the same verdict when the patrol ended and the pens closed over them. Radar owns the night now, and the night was our war.